Are you still reeling your fishing line drum tight the second your bait hits the bottom? You probably think you are perfectly ready for the bite, but the truth is, you are actually warning the biggest fish in the river to stay far away from your hook. Today, we are going to break one of the oldest golden rules in fishing. We are going to talk about why keeping your line tight in a heavy spring current guarantees you will lose the biggest fish of the season. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will look at a slack line in a totally different way. You might even realize why you have been getting skunked on those high water days. Let me ask you right now, do you set your rod tight, or do you let the current take the line? Tell me your method in the comments, because we are about to ruffle some feathers. Let us set the stage here. Spring fishing is totally unique. The snow is melting, the spring rains are pouring down, and the rivers are running high, fast and muddy. This is the time when the absolute monsters of the river wake up and start aggressively looking for food. Now, think about what your grandfather or your dad taught you about fishing on the bottom. They probably told you to cast out, let the sinker hit the mud, and slowly reel up the slack until the rod tip has a nice, steady bend to it. The idea is that you want to maintain direct contact with the bait. You want to feel every single little tap. We all do this. It is drilled into our brains from day one. But here is the problem. Those old-school rules were made for calm lakes and slow-moving summer water. When you take that exact same tight line habit and force it into a raging spring river, you are creating a massive trap for yourself. We do it out of pure habit, year after year, and we wonder why the only things we catch are tiny, aggressive little fish, while the giants ignore us completely. Picture this scenario. It is a crisp spring morning. The air is still cold enough to see your breath. You arrive at your favorite river spot. The water is running extremely high and muddy from the recent rains. You bait up your favorite heavy rig. You cast it out right into the heart of that surging current. The heavy lead sinker hits the bottom with a solid thud. Immediately, your muscle memory takes over. You start cranking the reel handle. You wind it down until the line is perfectly straight. You watch the rod tip bend under the tension. You set the rod in the holder and wait for the bite. It is exactly what you have been taught to do since you were a kid. It is exactly what every other guy on the bank is doing right now. But down below the surface, a totally different story is unfolding. The biggest fish in the river are swimming past your bait. They take one look and turn away. They are not impressed. In fact, they are spooked. You think you are setting a trap, but you are actually waving a giant warning flag. Your bait is doing things that natural food simply never does in a fast-moving river. The tension you created is working against you in ways you cannot even see. You sit there drinking your coffee, wondering why the big ones are not biting. You might blame the weather. You might blame the barometric pressure. But the real problem is staring right back at you from the end of your fishing pole. Let us talk about the simple physics of a tight line in fast water. Imagine taking a long piece of string and pulling it as tight as you possibly can. Now imagine a strong wind blowing against that tight string. What happens? It vibrates. It hums. The exact same thing happens to your fishing line in a spring current. The water is rushing past your tight line, pushing against it with incredible force. This turns your fishing line into an underwater guitar string. It vibrates uncontrollably from the rod tip all the way down to your bait. Now you have to remember how fish operate. Fish have a lateral line running down the side of their bodies. This organ is incredibly sensitive to vibration. They use it to hunt in completely dark or muddy water. When your line is humming like a high-voltage power wire, every fish within a 20-foot radius can feel it. A small, dumb fish might not care, but a massive, old fish that has lived through a dozen fishing seasons knows exactly what that vibration means. That unnatural hum screams danger. Before they even see your bait, they have already decided to avoid that entire area. We always tighten the line because we suffer from the illusion of sensitivity. We want to feel the bite. We are desperate for that instant feedback to travel up the line and into our hands. We think that a tight line means we will not miss a single tap. But you need to flip your perspective for a minute. Think about what the fish feels on the other end. Sensitivity goes both ways. When you have a tight line attached to a stiff graphite rod, there is absolutely zero give. When a big, smart fish comes along and casually picks up your bait to test it, they instantly feel the tension of the rod tip pulling back. They feel the drag of your reel. In nature, a dead piece of bait or a dying baitfish does not magically pull back when you bite it. The moment that trophy fish feels the unnatural resistance of your tight line, they open their mouth and spit the hook. They will drop your bait in a fraction of a second. You might see a tiny twitch on your rod tip, but by the time you go to set the hook, the fish is already 10 yards away. Your obsession with feeling the fish actually allowed the fish to feel you first. To understand why this is a mistake, you have to understand how a massive fish feeds in the spring. Big fish did not get big by wasting energy. In a heavy spring current, they are incredibly lazy. They find a large rock, a log, or a deep hole where the water is calm. They sit there and wait for the current to wash food directly to them. They want an easy, helpless meal rolling gently along the bottom. Now, think about your tight line rig. Because your line is pulled tight against a heavy sinker, your bait is anchored in place. Worse than that, the tension often lifts your bait a few inches off the bottom. So now you have a piece of bait hovering in mid-air, spinning wildly in the current, vibrating aggressively, and refusing to wash downstream naturally. Does that look like an easy, natural meal to a lazy monster fish? Absolutely not. It looks suspicious. A big fish wants to casually suck the bait in, turn around, and swim back to their resting spot. If your bait is locked down tight, they cannot do that. They will ignore your offering and wait for something that acts like real food. This is where we have to introduce the concept of the bow in the line. This is the secret weapon that old river rats use to catch giants. Instead of reeling your line tight after the sinker hits the bottom, you do the exact opposite. You actually peel off extra line from your reel. You let out 3, 4, or even 5 feet of extra line. You let the fast spring current grab that slack and push it downstream. This creates a large curve, or a bow, in your line between the rod tip and the sinker. At first, this will feel completely wrong. Your brain will scream at you to reel up the slack. You will feel totally out of control. But that curve of slack line is actually a massive shock absorber. It is a buffer between your stiff fishing rod and the sensitive mouth of a huge fish. By allowing the current to manage your line, you eliminate the violent vibration. The line lays softly in the water, curving naturally with the flow. You have just removed the warning sirens, and you have made your bait look entirely natural. Let us dig deeper into the resistance factor, because this is the #1 reason big fish are lost. Imagine you are walking down the street and someone hands you a seemingly empty cardboard box. You reach out to take it, but the box actually weighs 50 pounds. Your muscles jolt, you get surprised, and you probably drop it. That is exactly what a big fish experiences when they bite a tight line. They expect a soft, easy morsel of food. Instead, they get the rigid backbone of a heavy-action fishing rod. Older fish survive by being cautious. If something feels heavy or stiff, they reject it instantly. But when you fish with a bow in the line, the magic happens. A giant fish can swim up, inhale the bait, and turn away to swim back to their hiding spot. Because you have several feet of slack line bowing in the current, the fish feels absolutely nothing. There is zero resistance. They think they just scored a free meal. They will happily swallow the bait and keep swimming until that slack is entirely gone. You gave them the confidence to commit to the bite. Now I know what you are thinking. If there is a massive curve of slack in my line, how on earth am I supposed to know when a fish bites? This is the mental shift you have to make. You are no longer fishing by feel, you are fishing by sight. You are becoming a line watcher. The visual tell on the rod tip is actually more beautiful and more obvious than a tight line bite. When a fish picks up your bait on a bowed line, they start swimming. As they swim, that big curve of slack line begins to straighten out. The current is no longer holding the line, the fish is. You will look at your rod tip and notice that the line is suddenly moving upstream, cutting against the current. Or you will see the belly of the line slowly lift out of the water. Your rod tip will not violently shake. Instead, it will slowly and heavily start to load up as the line pulls tight. This visual warning gives you a massive advantage. It gives you 1 or 2 precious seconds to stand up, grab the rod, and get into the perfect position to deliver a devastating hook set. There is a huge myth floating around that fishing with slack line means you will miss the hook set. Anglers are terrified that they will not be able to drive the hook home if the line is not totally tight. Let us bust that myth right now. In a heavy spring current, the water itself is working to your advantage. When a huge fish takes the bait and swims away, they are dragging that line through fast-moving water. The drag of the water on the line, combined with the weight of your heavy sinker, creates a natural tension that builds up slowly. By the time that bow straightens out, the fish has completely swallowed the bait, and the sheer force of the current has often already driven the hook into the corner of their mouth. They essentially hook themselves. All you have to do is pick up the rod, rapidly reel up the remaining slack until you feel the heavy weight of the fish, and sweep the rod back. You do not need a violent, shoulder-dislocating jerk. The fish is already pinned. The slack line did not cost you the fish. It is the exact reason the fish is on the line in the first place. Let us talk about another major issue with a tight line, the sinker bouncing problem. Spring rivers are incredibly powerful. The water surges and pulses. It does not flow at one constant speed. When your line is completely tight, every single surge of current grabs your line and yanks directly on your sinker. Even if you are using a heavy 4 or 5 ounce weight, a tight line will cause the current to slowly drag your rig across the bottom. Your bait bounces along, tumbling over rocks and getting dragged completely out of the strike zone. You cast to a perfect spot, but 5 minutes later, your bait is 30 feet down the bank in the shallow water. But when you introduce a bow in the line, you solve this problem instantly. The slack line acts like a spring. When a heavy surge of water comes down the river, it simply pushes the belly of the line a little wider. It does not transfer that violent force down to the sinker. Your weight stays firmly planted exactly where you cast it. Your bait stays exactly in the prime strike zone where the big fish are waiting. If you have ever fished a river in the spring, you know all about the debris. The river is choked with dead grass, floating leaves, tree branches, and all sorts of garbage washing downstream. This is another area where the tight line completely ruins your day. A tight line cuts through the water like a knife. Every piece of floating grass that hits your line gets instantly caught. The current then pushes that heavy glob of weeds all the way down your line until it covers your bait. In 10 minutes, your rig looks like a giant underwater salad, and no fish is going to eat that. Now let us look at the slack line approach. Because your line is bowed downstream, it has a softer angle in the water. Much of the floating debris will actually hit the curve of your line and slide right over it, continuing downstream. It does not get pinned against a rigid string. A bowed line keeps your bait much cleaner for a much longer period of time. You spend less time reeling in to clear weeds and more time with a perfect bait waiting in the dark. Let us paint a real-life picture so you can see the difference. Imagine you are sitting on the bank. You have your favorite rod out and you cranked the line extremely tight. You are staring at the tip. Suddenly you see a tiny, sharp tap. Tap, tap. You jump out of your chair, grab the rod, and swing as hard as you can. Nothing. You reel in an empty hook. You curse the small fish for stealing your bait. But here is the heartbreaking truth. That was not a small fish. That was a giant. That was the fish you have been dreaming about all winter. They swam up, mouthed your bait, felt the unnatural stiffness of your tight line, and immediately blew the bait out of their mouth. That tiny tap was the fish rejecting you. Now rewind the tape. Imagine you cast to the exact same spot, but you let out 4 feet of slack. That same giant fish swims up and mouths the bait. Because there is no resistance, they close their mouth and slowly swim away. You do not see a tiny tap. Instead, you see your slack line slowly rise from the water. You grab the rod, reel down, and set the hook into a monster. That is the difference. Changing your mental approach is going to be the hardest part of this entire process. As fishermen, we are creatures of habit. We like control. We like things to feel a certain way. Leaving slack in your line goes against every instinct you have developed over the years. The first time you try this, you're going to sit there looking at that loose line in the water, and your brain is going to torture you. You will think to yourself, "This is crazy, I am definitely going to miss a fish." Your hand will constantly reach for the reel handle to tighten it up. You have to fight that urge. You have to discipline yourself. You must realize that the old methods do not apply to extreme conditions. Adapting to the environment is what separates the elite anglers from the guys who just sit on a bucket making excuses. Making this mental shift, accepting the slack line, and trusting the process is exactly what will turn an empty cooler into a photograph of a personal best catch. It takes patience, but the reward is massive. Let us take a moment to visualize exactly what is happening underwater right near your hook. When your line is tight, it forms a straight, tense diagonal line from the rod tip to the heavy sinker. Because of this tension, your leader line and your bait are often pulled slightly upward. Your bait is hovering, vibrating, and spinning wildly in the fast water. It looks chaotic. Small, aggressive fish might attack it out of pure reaction. But the big, wise fish do not want chaos. They want a meal that behaves naturally. Now imagine the bowed line. Because there is slack, there is no upward pull on the sinker. Your leader line can lay flat on the riverbed. Your bait gently wafts and rolls right along the mud or gravel, behaving exactly like a dead baitfish or a chunk of food that washed down from upstream. It is calm, it is natural, and it is right in the strike zone where the big bottom feeders are cruising. You are giving them a presentation they trust, rather than a presentation that confuses them. Of course, to master this slackline technique, you need to make sure you are using the right gear. Because you are relying on visual cues rather than feeling the bite, the type of line you use becomes incredibly important. You need a high-visibility fishing line. Bright neon green, yellow, or high-visibility orange are perfect for this. You need to be able to see exactly where that line enters the water and watch the curve it creates. If you are using clear line or dark green line in muddy spring water, you will never see the bite developing. You also need a rod with a very bright tip, or you can wrap some reflective tape around the top guide. Your eyes are your primary strike indicator now. You need to be able to stare at that line cutting through the surface of the river and notice the exact second the angle begins to change. The moment that bright line starts moving against the current, your heart is going to skip a beat because you know a giant has taken the bait. We also need to factor in the wind. Spring fishing is absolutely notorious for terrible wind conditions. When you have a heavy current pushing down the river and a strong wind blowing across the surface, fishing a tight line becomes a nightmare. The wind catches your tight line like a sail on a boat. It bows the line violently in the air, pulling your rod tip down and dragging your sinker across the bottom. You will get constant false bites caused by the wind gusts. But the slack line method actually fixes this problem too. By letting out extra line, you allow the wind to push the line down onto the surface of the water. The water grabs the line, sinks it just below the surface, and anchors it. The wind can blow all it wants above the surface, but your line is safely tucked underwater, curving perfectly with the current. Your bait remains totally undisturbed on the bottom. You have neutralized the wind completely simply by refusing to reel tight. It is crucial to understand the behavioral difference between small fish and true trophy fish. This is why the tight line method tricks so many people into thinking it works. When you fish a tight line, you will probably catch fish, but you will catch numbers of small fish. Small catfish, small bass, or small walleye are young and aggressive. They are constantly competing with each other for food. When they see a bait vibrating violently in the current, they just smash it out of pure instinct. They do not care about the resistance. You go home thinking your tight line strategy was brilliant because you caught 5 little fish, but you completely missed the real target. The granddaddy of the river, the 20-pound monster, does not compete with the little guys. He waits, he inspects, he feels his food. He demands perfection. If you want to catch average fish, keep doing what you are doing. If you want to catch the king of the river, you have to cater your entire presentation to his cautious, lazy feeding habits. That means slack. Let us walk through exactly how to execute this technique perfectly on your next trip. You walk down to the bank and bait up. You cast your rig slightly upstream or straight across the river. You let the heavy sinker drop until it hits the bottom with a thud. At this point, do not touch the reel handle. Do not crank it tight. Instead, open the bail or hit the spool release. Pull out an extra 3 to 5 feet of line directly from the reel by hand. Let that extra line fall onto the water. Watch the fast current grab it and carry it downstream. Once you see a nice U-shape forming in the line on the surface, close the bail. Place the rod in a sturdy holder. Do not try to hold the rod in your hands because your instincts will force you to mess with it. Just sit back, relax, and watch the belly of the line. The current is doing all the work for you. You have essentially set a completely invisible, tension-free trap for the smartest fish in the waterway. Let me describe the exact sequence of a perfect bite using the bowed line method, because it is thrilling to watch. You are sitting quietly, watching the neon line curve downstream. Suddenly, the line gives a quick jump. That is the fish picking up the bait. Because they feel absolutely no tension, they just keep moving. Now, you watch the belly of the line. Slowly, smoothly, that big downstream curve starts to rise out of the water. The line begins moving steadily upstream or straight out toward the middle of the river. The rod tip stays completely still at first, but then it slowly starts to bend downward as the slack runs out. By the time the rod tip is heavily loaded, that big fish has the bait crushed deep in its mouth. You casually stand up. You pull the rod out of the holder. You rapidly crank the reel 3 or 4 times to eliminate the remaining slack, and you drive the hook home into solid weight. There is no guesswork. There are no missed swings. It is a solid, committed hook up every single time. Think about the guy sitting 20 yards down the bank from you. He is using the old grandpa method. His line is cranked super tight. He is constantly jumping out of his chair to check his bait because the wind and the current keep shaking his rod tip. He gets frustrated with false bites. He misses fish after fish because they feel his tight line and spit the hook. He is fighting the river all day long. Meanwhile, you are playing a totally different game. You are relaxed. Your line is bowed beautifully in the current. Your bait is perfectly anchored on the bottom, completely unaffected by the wind. When you get a bite, it is a deliberate, heavy pull. You are not fighting the river, you are using the river to present your bait naturally. You are fishing smarter, not harder. You are targeting the top 1% of the fish in that water system, while the other guy is settling for the scraps. That is the power of understanding how current and tension really work. The ultimate payoff for breaking the rules is the memory of that one massive fish. It takes a lot of courage to look at a loose, slack line and genuinely believe you are fishing effectively. It goes against everything we were taught as beginners. But the very first time you use this trick, watch that slack line slowly straighten out and set the hook into an absolute monster that you would have normally missed. Your entire perspective will change forever. You will never look at a fast-flowing spring river the same way again. You will realize that the old rules are not absolute laws. They are meant to be broken, bent, and adapted when the extreme conditions demand it. The tight line might be great for a calm summer lake, but in the chaotic, surging waters of spring, the bow in your line is the ultimate key to success. Stop warning the fish. Stop pulling your bait out of their mouths. Give them the slack they need to make a mistake. So let us wrap this all up. Keeping your line drum tight in a heavy spring current is not helping you feel the fish. It is helping the fish feel you. The tension creates unnatural vibrations, lifts your bait out of the strike zone, and provides an instant warning of resistance to cautious, trophy-sized fish. The unexpected truth, the real plot twist here, is that a slack, bowed line is actually your most sensitive and effective strike indicator. It removes the resistance, anchors your bait perfectly on the bottom, and lets the fish commit fully to the bite before they ever feel your rod. Making this simple change in your presentation will completely revolutionize your spring river fishing. I want to thank you all for watching and for being open-minded enough to challenge the old-school ways. If this video gave you a light bulb moment, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and drop a comment down below. I want to know, are you going to try the slackline method on your next trip, or are you sticking to the old ways? Let us argue about it in the comments. I will see you on the water.